All right, I think I'm going to get started. I want to thank everybody for coming here bright and early this Wednesday morning. Also going to apologize for my raspy voice. I'm getting over a cold. And also for the people who were at my last presentation, there's a little bit of overlap, so you'll just have to hear it again. But I feel it's really important to get the general background. So I'm going to talk about the project that we're doing here in Hinsdale, and then I'm going to talk about the importance of parking in general, and the importance of mobility and access in your downtown, and then look at some of the initial findings from this project, and then talk about general parking management strategies. We are the regional planning agency for the 7 counties around Chicago. We work with 284 municipalities. And this project that we are doing is through our local technical assistance program. And we are working on dozens of planning projects across the region in situations similar to this. It's not necessarily parking, but on comprehensive plans or sustainability plans, things like that. And so our time that we will be working with Hinsdale, we believe, will span about 10 to 12 months for this project. So if you haven't realized it, most every community has some sort of parking problem. And if they don't have a parking problem, they have bigger problems because it means that people aren't coming to their downtown. And because of that, parking is quickly becoming one of the largest single land uses in our municipal downtowns. And it has a really big impact on our communities, and it influences the character, form, function, and flow. And if you have an excessive supply of parking, it makes walking and bicycling unpleasant and unsafe. It leads to stress on our stormwater systems through flooding and pollution, and it raises the cost of housing when you include the price of parking without consideration of the demand. But at the same time, having a supply of parking is important to support your local businesses. And our goal is to find the right balance between supply and demand and thinking like an economist to create livable communities. And this is the community I like to use as my starter example. It's actually downtown Barrington. And their village has been, or the residents and business owners have been complaining that they need more parking, and they want the village to provide more parking. And it's very hard to see, probably because of brightness, but these pink areas in this map is surface parking. And even with over 30% of their downtown turned into a parking lot, they believe that they still need more parking. Because if you fail to deal with the underlying issues of supply and demand, adding more supply isn't necessarily going to solve your problems. This is a Spring Hill Mall, and our suburban downtowns aren't malls. In this area, we have over 50% dedicated to parking, and this is downtown Hinsdale at the exact same scale. Our downtowns, rather than competing with the parking that you find at a mall, need to compete on their own terms, offering high-quality, walkable places that people want to visit with excellent parking management. And so that, okay, because here's your parking. It's obviously, there's no competition, and there's no way you could ever get to the same level that they have there. And when we think about mobility and access, you have, in this image, 24 cars in one block, 24 drivers, 24 pedestrians and bicyclists, and 24 bus riders. So when you think about mobility and access, you have to think about how people not just get to your downtown, but how they get from one location to the next. Because if you think about designing our streets and our downtowns with that in mind, you can get a lot more people into your businesses and into the downtown with less sacrifice. It's easier said than done, obviously, and I brought copies of the parking management paper that we wrote last year, and that was put together with representatives from around the Chicago region, and it's to serve as a guide of how to do parking management. And we are walking the village of Hinsdale through the steps outlined in that paper, which are to evaluate the current situation, understand the unique challenges that the community faces, then work on education and outreach to get an understanding of the unique perspectives from different user groups, and also to help educate people on how complex parking really is, and then come up with strategies that will address those problems and implement them, and then monitor and improve upon them. So we did a bunch of parking counts, and we also interviewed about a dozen stakeholders. And so I'm going to show you the maps, but I'm also first going to run through some of the many things that we have heard. And this is really sort of in jest, but we have heard a lot of what the parking problem is. The salon ladies, the realtors, the commuters. It used to be the realtors. Starbucks employees, it's the Starbucks customers. We need a parking garage. We don't need a parking garage. People need to walk more. People won't walk. The employee lot is always full. We're sick of filling out surveys. We just want you to do something. So we've got a lot of finger pointing and people tired of being asked questions about parking. So they want us to do something. And the fact is there's validity to all of these statements. Everybody is a little bit right and nobody is totally right. This is a very complex situation. So here is the parking occupancy map from 8 a.m. on a weekday. And you can see blue. This one I did not hand out, so I apologize. Blue means it's between 80 and 90% occupied, and that is the ideal amount of parking you want, so that means that it's easy to find a space. And at 8 a.m., your commuter lots are approaching 90% full. And then Hinsdale, the red, is up to 100% full, and the middle school lot is full at 8 a.m. By 10 a.m., it is a complete hunting game to try and find a parking spot along Washington from as far north as Chicago down to 3rd Street, and then First between Garfield and First, maybe, is that Grant even? It gets pretty tight in there, and all of the permit lots close in the center are full, and the commuter lots will stay full for the rest of the day until they come home. By noon, doesn't change a whole lot. 2 p.m., still center area is very congested. And by 6 p.m., it's pretty easy to find a parking spot. Commuters have gone home. You know that that lot is, the main lot, you can park there. And the middle school's emptied out. But the restaurants along First Street are keeping it at a pretty healthy occupancy. We also came down on a Saturday around noon to count parked cars. There was an estate sale going on in the top corner over there, so there was a lot of parked cars. But still, along Hinsdale and those 2 diagonal lanes of Washington were completely full. And we did not come in on a Sunday because we were told that Saturday is worse than Sunday. So if we're wrong on that, feel free to correct me and we'll come out and do it again. But we were told Saturday's worse, so once we got that, we figured we have a general understanding. So your locus of congestion and concentration is sort of where I put this star, and then the demand levels decrease as you get further from that star. And right here I have the merchant permit parking areas. If you have the red merchant permit, that's where you can park. And so we looked at, on a busy day, noon, on a weekday, again, apologize, it's a little hard to see, but how full those areas are. And we see that some of them totally full, and others, people aren't really using that merchant parking area. And so we sort of wanted to think about why aren't they? And then we also heard that a lot of employees are parking on the really congested area. So we thought about from the financial perspective. If you buy a merchant permit, it's $180 for 6 months, which means $30 a month. And there are an average of 175 meter hours in a month. If you look at the Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So if you are working less than a full 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, it might be cheaper for you to feed the meter. So there's a little bit of an imbalance where your prime spaces would be cheaper to park in than the permit spots. And so that's something we need to address. I guess that would be 120 hours or less. So like a 30-hour week, or maybe you have more hours on the weekend and you know you can park in the main lot. So your workers are smart and they're parking and feeding the meter. So then I also made this map, which you did get copies of, to go through all the signage and different regulations we have in the downtown. And as you can see, there are quite a number of differences on streets, and they've all been put in place for different reasons. You have regulations to keep commuters from parking close in and leaving their car all day. You have regulations to try and get the merchants to park further out. And they serve their purposes, but sometimes it can be confusing, and this information was hard to come by from the website. I had to walk with Scott and have him go check things and get it all together in one place. But I think once we have this information, it can be really helpful to give to the general public. So that's sort of the conclusions that we've had from our initial findings. And now I'm going to talk about different strategies that people use to address them. We have pricing strategies and non-pricing strategies. And some of the non-pricing strategies could be simplified maps and improved information. And also look at employer incentives, and can we reward people that don't drive? If that means, if you buy a permit pass for your employee, do you also pay somebody who walks to work? And that might even be a high school kid who's doing a part-time job at Corner Bakery. Maybe give them a small little stipend for not driving. And also improving walking and bicycling infrastructure, changing parking hours and time limits, and adjusting, simplifying permitting. And some communities are also looking at car sharing vehicles to reduce the general need for everyone to have a car right close to them at all times. But any economist will tell you that the easiest way to reduce demand for any good is to price it. And when you use pricing in your parking, the goal is not to collect revenue for the village. The goal is to open up 1 or 2 spaces per block. So in order to do that, you set the lowest price that will create that availability, so that drivers who are willing to pay can get to where they're going, find a spot, and go, and others will park further out and walk. And typically that is your employees who learn quickly what the cost is and where it's cheaper, and they won't park in the center. You want to give people options and make parking friendly. I would say that the meters that Hinsdale has right now are not very friendly. They're a little outdated. Is there anybody who in their business says, "I'm sorry, we only accept quarters"? No, probably not. You're not going to stay around very long. So any meters that you have now should take all forms of payment. They should text you if you are about to run out of time, and they should ask if you want to add more time. Smart meters should provide you data on usage, so you know which streets are where people want to go, and you can make adjustments. And obviously you wouldn't want to do that very frequently, because that adds to the confusion for the customers, and you want your customers first. And when I say put your customers first, I know there are a lot of people that don't want to pay for parking, and they'll say, like, this is absolutely terrible. But I mean, if you asked if they want to pay more for gasoline, they're also going to say, no, I will not. So it's not the easiest thing to do, but it is how you reduce the demand for a good that's in short supply. So you can also increase the supply of parking at the same time, or instead of, you could open new streets to parking, especially if it's the long-term employee parking, by changing time limit restrictions, or widen streets and put more angled parking on. Hinsdale has done that in a number of places. You can create new lots or look to building a parking garage. And each of these comes with their cost. Space in a surface lot will cost about $4,000 to $8,000. It's about $30,000 per space for any parking garage in the region. Up to $40,000 to $70,000 for robotic parking, and up to $100,000 per space for an underground structure depending on the complexity with your water table and how fancy you want to make it. So if a municipality is going to make that type of investment, you really need to understand the costs and benefits and say, like, well, if we are going to build a parking garage, will that bring new businesses? How many people will that new activity generate, and what types of tax proceeds will you get from each space? And is the village going to get a positive return on that type of investment? And because it's so much more cost efficient to manage your parking, that is what CMAP recommends before you go to increase supply. And if you are going to increase supply, there are a number of strategies that can be useful in the interim. And if you also are going to build a garage, you would need to look at a long-term plan for cost recovery and maintenance. Because like the parking garage that I showed you in the last picture, that was Downers Grove, that was $22 million. And that's a huge investment of capital. And now Downers Grove is still trying to figure out where they can park more people because it's full and they have demand. They called Scott the other day. So it doesn't necessarily solve your problem. So I'm now going to hand it over to Mike. Mike Fox, well, he is a business owner in the village of Oak Park. And in 2008, Oak Park went through the process of understanding their supply and demand, and they chose to raise the meter prices, lower the cost of the less attractive parking, and there were a lot of business owners who were worried that that would affect their business, and because they thought their customers would be really upset. And there are a lot of things that Oak Park did wrong, and there are a lot that they did right, and it's not necessarily what Hinsdale has to do, and Hinsdale is not Oak Park. There are a lot of differences, but I just wanted you to hear from a business owner who went through that process. So I'll let Mike introduce.